Great. So, Dick, let's start from your works in Vilnius. I counted 8 or...
That sounds about right. Yes, I think 8.
8 operas you did in Vilnius.
Yeah.
Do you have your favorite one, or do you have your closest to the heart one?
My closest to the heart one would be the Bohème that we did, the first show that we all did together. Because it was, I think it was such an achievement to make this beautiful show happen in this space that none of us really knew how we could work in or how we could approach. It was the first time that that I worked together with the set constructors, Romas and his amazing team. And it was the show in which I think we all built a sort of a language together and a way of working together, which we then built on through the next shows that we did. So yeah, that I'm incredibly fond of as a memory. The other one would probably be the latest one that I did, which was Faust, the Gounod's Faust, which must be about 3 years ago, something like that. Which was another, but you know, so many productions that were so memorable, you know, in their own particular ways.
Your colleague Marius Jacovskis, also set designer, who've been working with Vilnius City Opera, told that it's almost punishment to work in Congress Palace stage, because it's not a theater, not any theatrical place to work in. What was your first impression and your biggest challenges inside that concert palace?
My first impression was how pale it was inside. How, you know, theatres are normally kind of black, you know, maybe with some red velvet around, so on, but they're usually, whereas the Congress Palace inside it's a kind of an off-white or with bits of grey, you know, so it's a very, you know, nothing is, there is, everywhere is exposed, there's nowhere to hide anything, you know. There's normally in an opera house or a theatre you would hide things up in the ceiling. The ceiling in the Congress Palace comes down, you know, so it can baffle the sound. Normally you'd have wings where you could store things, but the wings are just the continuing width of the space, and there's nothing under the stage. And for the first few years that I did shows there, I would talk to Romas and I'd go, surely there's a way we could go up into the ceiling. And he'd say, no, there isn't. And I'd say, there must be. And then eventually he'd take me up into the roof and show me that there was absolutely no way. And of course he was completely right. So yes, so that was the first impression, that there really is nowhere to hide anything. But you know, that's always a challenge. So once you've accepted that those are the rules of the game, then the game can become really interesting, because it's about where you can hide things in plain sight, I suppose. You know, with Bohème, for example, in the final, you know, version of the set, you came in to the space and you saw a huge sloping roof with a little attic on top, you know, and you know, I guess you thought, well, what's going to happen? You know, how are they going to do all the other scenes? And then this sort of amazing moment happens at the end of Act 1, where, you know, 6 guys come out. They let the roof down. It comes down, and inside it has, you know, the whole of the Café Momus and the streets of Paris and the brasseries, and it's just one of those sort of lovely warm moments that you share with an audience, where, you know, it's like magic, I suppose. Yeah.
So after first La Bohème, Dalia is calling you again. Dick, hello, we're making opera in Congress Palace again.
Yeah.
And your reaction?
Bring it on. Yeah.
Okay.
Come on, let's do more. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in some aspects, set designer is also architect and mathematician, which shall be also artist, but at the same time very precise. Has a very precise ability to count everything,
Yes.
in numbers and in details.
Yes, that's right. It's true. Yes, in theory, that's the case. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and how everything starts? You are coming to a director with mood boards, with small, drawings of your vision. Can you reveal a bit the kitchen of working with director and working with whole team in the opera? Because you are one of the creators of the opera. You have many people also to adjust to.
That's right. So it's a different process with every director.
And with Dala, for example.
So with Dahlia, who's definitely worth talking about, she will begin by giving me a sort of a vision of the piece, or why she wants to do the piece, what the meaning is for her. And I remember with Bohème that I was coming back from rehearsal in London, and there was a terrible traffic jam through the Blackwall Tunnel, which goes under the Thames. And I was trying to drive home from this rehearsal for a meeting with Dahlia at my studio. And she arrived at my studio. I was still a long way away. And in the end, we had the first meeting by telephone. I was in the traffic jam in the car and she was in my studio. And she told me why she wanted to do Bohème and why she wanted to set it in Paris in the 1950s, 1960s, with this very beautiful idea that she had that the 50s was a period of time that was sort of robbed from the Lithuanian people, and not a period that could be thought of in the way that, you know, in freer parts of Europe at the time, where you would be able to experience. That seemed like a really amazing idea. So we talked for a long time with me in my car and her in my studio, and she sort of outlined all of these ideas, I suppose, that she wanted to be able to put in front of the Lithuanian public, including the opera itself, the beautiful, beautiful opera itself. I guess then I began to think about what the challenges were. And I suppose that, as you say, the degree to which a set designer is an architect, it's absolutely true that you are a controller of space, and controlling the space is how you go about, you know, presenting more than just beautiful pictures, but a structure within which you can create beautiful pictures. I think I work very quickly with models. I look at a lot of pictures. I looked at Jay's photographs of old Paris in the 19th century, which is a bit earlier and so on, more contemporary ones. But having built a model of the Congress Palace at a scale of 1 to 25, which is a process that for me is really important, where you kind of make physically the space that you're working in. While you're doing that, you get to know it, you know, you get to know and you start to have ideas about how you can make it work for you. And then you start to have sort of crazy ideas. Yes, this is an attic, and this is, where's everything going to come from? How can you hide it? And so on. And then it starts to filter together like that. And I worked very quickly to make a model just showing the ideas of the set, of how there could be a big roof and an attic, and it could come down, everything could be inside. And then called Dahlia, and she came over to my studio. This time I was there, and you know, the wonderful thing about Dahlia, you know, this was kind of a big, crazy, impractical idea, and Dahlia loves big, crazy, impractical ideas. She looks at it straight away, and she has a particular sort of hooting shriek she does when she's excited by something, and that's what she did. And so after that, it was just kind of refining the details, how you could make, again, you know, working in the model, how you could make everything happen, make it more interesting, more intricate, more beautiful, how you could manage to get the 4 different scenarios working in this space. At which point you arrive at a hopefully wonderful model that you then take, in this case, to Vilnius. to meet with all the team who are going to work on it, in particular the workshop who are going to build it, and so on. And the model forms a sort of a document from which everybody works.
You mentioned period and time and place aspect. Is it important to you to keep the details of particular time, period, history? Some of set designers, we are more to the abstract side, without recognizing which you cannot say the time. And for you, the period, is it important, the history? For costume designer John Morel, he's making a lot out of history, out of historical interpretation, out of historical research. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it depends entirely on the project. And I think there are some operas or some productions of operas that demand a sort of historical accuracy. And I have to say, when I'm historically accurate, I like to be very, very, very historically accurate. But at the same time, you know, it's completely possible to work in an abstracted world, and that has its own, you know, its own logic too. I think as long as you find a logic that you are able to convince yourself in and to follow, then you know, that works really well. Obviously, with operas, there's a great tendency to set them in different time periods. You know, that's always been done throughout the certainly 20th century. To find a sort of a resonance of some sort, so that we're not always watching them in the same frocks from the same period that they were written in. So I think, yeah, if you do light on a particular period, I think it's really great to be consistent with it. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I like to find a sort of logic that at a certain point that I can answer most questions that people ask me, whether the answer is it's a kind of crazy, messed up, illogical, imaginative world, or whether it's Paris, it's 1957, it's winter, it's etc. etc. So yeah, so those are the important things. This Don Giovanni we're doing in Athens at the moment, for example, it's set in a hotel. It's sometime maybe in the last 30 or 40 years. But the whole air is very mysterious, very strange, and quite abstracted. So it's like a sort of a realism that sort of goes off to one side. Yeah, so it's possible to do all these things, I think, just as long as you can justify it.
What was the most unexpected place in set you have put your opera in? For example, in Onegin, you're setting all play in a Soviet style apartment.
Yes, exactly.
With smells, with everything, with very, very small scenography. So what was the most unexpected for you place you have traveled with your set?
To set one. I think for me, there was a production of Snegurochka of Rimsky-Korsakov that I did in Ireland, in Wexford, at the festival in Wexford. And we set it in a variety of locations that had been destroyed by the intervention of man. So in this strange and beautiful story that is about the sun not coming out and about the climate, about, you know, winter not forgiving spring and all of these strange things. We set various scenes, for example, in the fairground at Chernobyl, with an old sort of gondola falling off the Ferris wheel, in the Aral Sea, which is completely dried out, and it's a desert of ships stranded in the desert. It was this sort of series of evocations. None of these locations actually were any close to each other, but they were all places that had been destroyed by the intervention of man. That was a really interesting sort of location.
Apocalypse, I mean, it's post-apocalyptical time where
exactly,
Somehow. Sorry.
An apocalypse that you don't even have to imagine because it's in our time. You know, instead of you can imagine, like Mad Max, for example, that's set in an apocalyptic time. But really interesting to make apocalyptic scenery that's actually in our own time, with all these little apocalypses that are sort of going on. Yeah.
What about sense of fashion in set in operas? Because for a while we saw many operas which were set in, for example, Nazi Germany, or in any particular time period, which is like, you know, common fashion for many directors, many theaters building their operas in. Do you have a sense of what is fashionable in set design at the moment, or in opera world at the moment? What's trendy, what we shall use or what we shall not use? What is old-fashioned already, or?
I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of glass boxes on stage, but no, and that's sort of joking in a way. But I guess I don't really know. I wouldn't be able to say that I particularly followed that. And, you know, designers are generally, and directors, such imaginative people, always looking for, you know, because any idea, an original idea is amazing, and it's amazing because it makes people sit up and think. Then if you do it again, they don't think as much, and if you carry on doing it, then it becomes banal and people go to sleep. You know, it's that. Yes, so I think. Yes, you have to be cautious about, but I think people generally are. You know, I don't think that. But it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of. I don't know. Is there a lot of fashion for work that looks ugly, perhaps, that is anti-aesthetic, perhaps? And perhaps that's a good thing too, you know, because people can get lulled into a sense of things that are just beautiful and just as aesthetic. And so sometimes you need to have people who come along, you know, like the Dadaists, who come along and go, get rid of all this. It's like, people are falling asleep. They need to wake up. But then after a while, you know, if everything becomes anti-aesthetic, then that's, you know, lazy as well. So, yeah.
That is really saying a lot about the European scene and European theater, where it's even, I think there is a term, Eurojazz, to describe the very different and very difficult approach in search of new forms, of new interpretations of classic works. And it even becomes very hard to handle in terms of watching it. And I think it's very hard to act and think in that production. Like
perhaps, yes.
Are you more in this side when you are open to those kind of trash, Eurojazz things, where you are searching beyond the boundaries, beyond the, you know, traditional any frames, to somehow to create very, very opposite to any expected image scenography?
I mean, I'm sort of in favor of that if that is the earnest intention of it. If a person has an amazing idea, you know, Romeo Castellucci, for example, I find all of his works challenging, extraordinary, and absolutely full of integrity. But, you know, you also, I mean, it's so hard to generalize, and I wouldn't like to generalize, but, you know, you might see a sort of vogue for opera presentation, perhaps in, I don't want to say in Germany, but perhaps in Germany, because they make a lot of opera in Germany, which is wonderful. They don't make nearly enough opera in Britain, for example, you know, and it's great that in Germany, every major town has its own opera house, its own company, and all of these things. But sometimes you feel that you know, there again, you know, that opera is a punishment for audiences rather than, but, you know, I don't want to say that, because these sort of earnest experimentations where people are really, really looking for new ways. I mean, I love, for example, the work of Phelim McDermott, Improbable Theatre, just thinking of his Akhenaten recently at English National Opera. The most extraordinary piece of work, you know, in which the stage was full of these very precise jugglers, in which the singer playing Akhenaten was stripped on stage and singing, turning upside down and being read. I mean, you'd think it would be a nightmare, and it was absolutely beautiful, and the intention of it was so strong. So I think as long as all of this is done honestly, then it's you know, it's important that people are making, you know, new discoveries and new challenges each time. Yeah.
Do you have your own red line, which you don't want to cross in terms of discoveries?
The only thing is, I would say, is that I always want to take an audience with me, that I've no interest in offending an audience or upsetting an audience at all. I might want to stretch the boundaries of what they think is tasteful or proper. Those boundaries these days are quite, you know, quite wide. I think, yeah, I think I would like to make people surprised and sit up and think and so on. I don't want to offend them though. I don't want them to make them, you know, want to leave the opera house, you know, although that sometimes happens. But no, and I don't want to mystify them either. I don't want to pretend that I have some secrets that they will never be let into. I hate work like that. You know, the thing I've always found most interesting about theatre and opera is a communication between a performance and an audience, and I think that's, yeah, that's really important.
But sometimes making new rules is painful. We can remember, for example, Ring with Patrice Chéreau in 80s in Bayreuth, when people even have an open confrontation before the opera. But it was an important step to move forward, and with some conservative views was, you know, remained in the past. But let's move into your kitchen side again for a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine the moment when after you are already have your set in small scale on drawings, and here you have moment of truth, the first day when the scenography is already physically present on stage, and you're seeing everything for the first time in reality. What is the sense inside? Do you have any, you know, doubt or something, or do you feel afraid of the result you will see in reality? Will everything work? Will everything will suit the stage you've planned? Maybe something was not adjusted. What's happening inside at that moment?
Yes, it's horrifying. And, you know, I have to say it's an extended long period, you know, because, you know, it's important to say we've sort of missed out a step between the idea and the model and the moment it arrives on stage, which is the extraordinary period when you work with the set builders and with really skilled and talented and intelligent people who look at your ideas and your model and your drawings and turn them into things made out of steel and wood and painted and all of these things. And that process is one that can kind of cushion you against, you know, the horrors of arriving on stage and everything going wrong. You know, I can't say too often how Romas and his team of builders in Lithuania, who, you know, we worked together 8 times making, you know, really challenging sets, extraordinary work, and I've loved working with them and their precision and care and willingness to make something work. I could say by contrast, I did a job in China last year, the year before last, massive musical, you know, it was huge, crazy idea, lots of scenes, lots of set, and I arrived with my beautiful models and I said, these are beautiful models. And then I could never find anybody to meet, to talk to about how they were going to be built. And it was just horrifying. Eventually, after, you know, 2 months and 2 weeks before we were to get into the theatre, I said, look, please, I need to go and see something that's under construction. And was taken out to a big warehouse outside Beijing. And they had literally printed out my plans on a scale of 1 to 1. So like you had huge sheets of paper that were 11 meters wide and 4 meters high, put them on the floor, and people were just trying to build scenery on top of it. Of course, it got into the theatre and absolutely nothing worked. And we lost 4-week tech because just watching the scenery collapse. Eventually we got something on, but it was a nightmare. Anyway, so those are the two ends of the scale. It's always challenging and difficult. And it's always, you know, it's scary because there are so many things that can go wrong and so much of it's happened in your mind. You know, I really trust a good model because you go and see something that's a part of it that's been made in a workshop and you look at it and you go, my God, did I really design it to be that big? It's crazy. And then of course, you know, it all comes in together and it goes in the space and everything looks the right size, you know, together. So I trust a model, I trust a good set of builders. And then after that, you know, it always is a struggle because there's never enough time when you're teching in a theatre. There are always challenges with scenery and so on. And then of course your own sort of anxiety about whether your concept is you know, a good one or a bad one, up to, although, you know, you've tested it quite a long way. I mean, now in Athens, the set is being built and goes into the theatre at the moment, and on Thursday we start rehearsing in the theatre on the set, and it's just extraordinary. It's this massive, moving, big, shiny black. I mean, it's just crazy, but it's so exciting, you know. And the other lovely thing about what we do is the people that we work with are excited as well. You know, no one works in this because they're not excited about it. You know, all the builders are excited and everyone wants to see it work. That's it. So yeah, it can be awe-inspiring, but yeah, when it works, it's good.
Dalia mentioned that video director is nothing without set designer. And who is important equally for set designer? I mean, light designer or costume designer, who really makes a scenography living? Who gives a life for your scenography?
Well, it is many people. You know, the director, of course, is one of them, because if you don't have a director that wants to work with your ideas, that wants to, you know, take on the challenge of the space and use every aspect of it, then it can be incredibly disappointing, you know. And Dalia always wants to make every aspect of it work. A lighting designer is just so important because, you know, a set without light can be the most uninspiring, unatmospheric thing. With a good lighting designer, it's, you know, and Peter Mumford is the most extraordinary lighting designer. I love working with him. And the designer, of course, yes, because then that sort of is what inhabits your world and so on. So when it's all working, you know, and a great choreographer as well. If you've got a great choreographer who can make all these performers, it's just such a collaborative thing. It's fantastic. It really is. And then the performers themselves, you know, so it's quite humbling finally that you make your sort of crucible and watch all the elements sort of come together. And yeah.
Dick, very last question.
Yeah.
What is your opera, your favorite opera, your loved opera, opera of your heart you would like to share with our listeners and our audience, which you would recommend to find and to listen to? I'm not asking about the operas you've worked with Dalia or in Vilnius,
Yeah.
but I know another one in a lifetime.
So actually, I would say it would be one that I'd really like to recommend to people and love. There will be so many actually, but I'm going to say Akhenaten that I was talking about a little bit earlier, a Philip Glass opera. And I discovered it myself about 30 years ago, before I'd even started designing, before I'd started working in opera. And I used to play it and play it and play it. And it's a piece I would always have loved to have designed, and sadly other people got there first. But it's an amazing piece of work because it talks about this period in Egyptian history when there was this extraordinary flowering of culture under the pharaoh Akhenaten. And it's put together with this amazing set of texts. When is it set? I don't know, 4,000 years BC or something like that. And then it's brought up right to the very end and the destruction. It has texts that come, you know, sort of live texts from 6,000 years ago that feels current now. And I think it's an amazing piece, really. It's very, there's a great sort of profundity and that marshalling of ideas within an operatic form, I think is fascinating. Yeah, so that's today's recommendation. Might be different tomorrow.
Thank you, Dick. It was a pleasure.
Great pleasure. Pleasure. Bye-bye.